Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Cheap Seats. This is your weekly English Premier League show where we just discuss what's either happened the past weekend or since it's an international week. We're now going to move into something a little bit different, talk about a lot of transfers and everything else. But just so everybody doesn't get all crazy with me, I know Arsenal's at the bottom. We haven't scored a goal. And I know Spurs is at the top of the log, so it's fine. It's okay. But before we go into anything, remember you can please do like and subscribe to our channel. Like the show, subscribe to our channel. We've got some cricket going on from tomorrow with the South African men's team playing Sri Lanka. Hopefully it won't rain, but do subscribe and then you'll be notified when we go live. But today we're going to be discussing a very, very important topic, and that is the transfer window ratings. We're going to be rating 8 teams in the Premier League. Well, the 8 teams that matter, because Arsenal's not a top club anymore, so it's a team that matters.
That's for beating yourself up before we even start.
But anyway, and we've got John Emil here. He is a journalist and a friend of ours. He's I met him at the Emirates the one time. That was the coolest time ever. Seeing John Emil at the Emirates. John, how are you doing, my man?
Oh, fantastic to see you after that really brief moment after the Newcastle game. It really has been a hot minute, but hopefully for your sake, things will start to improve after this window. We'll wait and see.
Yeah, well, that's another story for another day, but we shall see. Quick question. Obviously, Ronaldo has joined the league. The Manchester United fans, as you can see, Wahid is up in all his glory. Is it Viva Ronaldo, or is it? Let's wait and see whether this guy is still the same Ronaldo that left the Premier League.
I have no doubt that he is a completely different player, and he's going to offer them something a lot more kind of structured and mature. Obviously, in his time at Real Madrid and Juventus, he navigated his way to being a really top-class striker. It's going to be interesting to see how they can adjust with Cavani and Ronaldo up top. But certainly, in terms of the experience that he's going to bring to the team, in terms of what Mason Greenwood, even Marcus Rashford at this stage can learn off him, it's quite invaluable. He's going to bring goals. You can guarantee he will still bring goals. Maybe not quite the flair that he once had, but he's got clinical precision now, which I think is... he's still definitely in the top 5 players in the world as far as that's concerned. As a Liverpool fan, I'm actually in a strange way almost happy to see some players returning to their old clubs. It's kind of a bit of a nostalgia throwback to the really hardcore rivalries that we used to have. But if this is really going to take United to the Premier League title, strangely enough, that's another question. I'm not so sure that Ronaldo is the missing piece in the puzzle. I don't buy that. Certainly in terms of branding and publicity and everything, it made financial sense for the club. So we wait with anticipation.
Well, we saw the share price rocket on Friday afternoon as the news trickled in of somehow Sir Alex Ferguson swooping in. So financially, it will make sense. I still think they have put themselves a notch above. I know why he doesn't want to say that it's a title season where they have to, but they have to win something. They have to win something, even if it's Carabao Cup that Manchester City seemingly have controlled. But we'll see about that.
The Manchester City Carabao Cup.
Yes, that one. They've held it hostage for a couple of years. Somebody needs to take it away from them. It's just that everyone seems to be reluctant. So, gents, today we're going to do slightly different. We've given guys a lot of different teams out of the 8 teams that matter, as I call them. And we're going to ask you to rate the transfer window work that each back office has done and each coach has done to either get players in or move players out. And so I'm just going to go top of the log all the way down to the teams that matter. Jean, I'll ask you about Liverpool and I'll ask you about some other teams, maybe even Chelsea there to counter Cyrus if Cyrus still thinks Saul is the piece that unlocks the entire universe. But starting off with the first team, Manchester City. Dean, what grading or what rating would you give Manchester City's signings in this transfer window? Or what work, signings and also exits? Because I think for some teams it's you have to balance both.
I mean, there's no secret about the fact that City were going after Kane. So they failed. And I think that just goes to prove that oil money doesn't buy everything in this world. So in terms of that, in terms of the actual transfer targets at the beginning of the season, I would say if I had to give it out a rating, it would be 5 out of 10 because they achieved half of their targets. They got
So now you want to give them Grealish an improvement?
Look, Grealish is a great signing. No one's going to doubt that. But at the same time, they didn't need another midfielder. They needed a striker. They needed an out-and-out striker. They needed a number 9. They made no secret about the fact that they were going after Harry Kane. And now Pep's trying to backtrack and say, oh, no, we never actually put in a bid. He was a Tottenham player. We weren't going to kind of entertain that. So they would have felt like they failed. And, now we're seeing Torres playing at that number 9, Jesus playing off the right. So they've got different ways of managing their team now. And I think that's because of a failed transfer window of who they were actually going out to go and buy. And, that's why in terms of rating, I can't give them above 50% because they only achieved 50% of what they would have wanted to do at the start of the season, at the start of the transfer window. So getting rid of Sergio Aguero on a free, I mean, he was barely playing last season anyway, so I wouldn't say that's a massive thing. And then, like Jack Harrison going to Leeds, he was there already previous season. So there weren't any more noticeable departures. I mean, okay, Eric Garcia going to Barcelona was the other fairly big one, but that was in the pipeline for a while. So in terms of that, I wouldn't say it's a great window for City, and I think a lot of their fans would probably agree. Having said that, though, I do think they still have tools at their disposal to manage the next couple fixtures, and if they absolutely need to, City have the money and the means to go out in the winter transfer window and splash some cash and get what they want. So, yeah, that's my rating. That's what I give them.
5 out of 10 from Dean.
5 out of
Cyrus,
10.
is it a complete failure of Manchester City? Can we? Because I remember last week we spoke about how the fact that we thought they might try get a left back to try and sort out the Mendy situation, as awful as it is, on the field and off of it, as well as Zinchenko, who we all thought maybe is not a true left back.
Look, it's a weird one, Paul, because you look at somebody like Nathan Ake. Ake played left back for quite some time at Bournemouth and also at Chelsea. He's one of those versatile defenders. So I think they'll look at potentially just sliding him across and using him in a different position at City. We just have to remember that as much as City were keen to get Kane in, this is a squad that has firepower. They've got weaponry up and down the pitch. And so when you look at what the needs are, they weren't really all that glaring apart from one or two positions where you think, okay, fine, maybe a defensive left back, not necessarily Zinchenko, who doesn't know what defense looks like. He's heard about it, but he hasn't quite figured it out yet. But then when you look at it from a attacking perspective, Pep, apart from Aguero, there haven't necessarily been like really massively striker focused. So having Jesus as being the sort of main guy there is like, we can use him. Maybe we'll throw in a youngster if we need to. But in essence, we're false nining and we're okay with doing that. And it's worked. It's not as if they're not the reigning champions, and it's not as if they didn't win the league by an absolute country mile last season. So when you look at it, how much more did they have to improve versus how much everybody else had to do in order to play catch up? And I think that's the situation we're working with. The biggest issue for them right now is Kevin De Bruyne not necessarily being 100%. And they were just like, look, we've got the dosh. Let's just buy Jack Grealish.
That 100 million seemed too much, but it is what Aston Villa wanted.
Look, it is. But I also think that we have to remember, being a cynic sometimes, the reason why these deals get done isn't necessarily always for footballing reasons. It has to do with, balancing some sort of account somewhere. And I'm being very facetious when I say that. And at the same time, giving yourself a signing that the fans can be like, oh, we got Grealish, so, we're not in a complete uproar, as opposed to like Jean-Emile's Liverpool, who we'll get to.
Yes. Okay, moving on. Manchester United. This was Wahid's random generator, and Dean got Manchester United. So Dean, what rating are you giving Manchester United's business? They've managed to do everything but one.
Well, I mean, I think we can all agree their signing of the season was probably Tom Heaton from.
Yeah, of course.
So
To
they did
bolster
really
those
well.
goalkeeping stocks.
They did really well in signing Heaton there. No, look, I think at the start of the season, not City, sorry, I was thinking of the bigger club in Manchester. United needed an attacker, which they obviously went and got Sancho. Okay, they needed that young star that's going to try and score
in Manchester who still can't call their stadium.
Okay, this is my time to talk, Wahid. You'll get yours. Don't worry. So I think they needed a proper centre back. They went and got Varane. Unreal signing, right? Everyone can agree with that. Sancho, definite prospect in the future. Obviously, in Dortmund or in the Bundesliga lit it up, he needs to still prove that in the Premier League. Now, then the last week of the transfer window, everyone and their cousin agreed that United needed another defensive midfielder or someone in that midfield to kind of keep things ticking, keep things going, which they don't have. Fred is a disaster. Matic is getting old. That midfield needs some rework, okay? Obviously, then there was the Ronaldo to City, and make no light about it. So Alex Ferguson got involved and whatever happened, all right? Signing Ronaldo is a great distraction from what they actually needed, and I think anyone could agree with that. Nevertheless, it is probably one of the best signings that have happened to the Premier League in recent times, and there's no doubt about that. So in terms of United, what they needed, I'd probably give it like 6.5, maybe 7 out of 10. In terms of excitement that it's generated, there's no jokes that 10 out of 10 for United. Everyone wants to see Ronaldo. Everyone wants to see how he's going to run rampant in every team and wants to see what he's going to bring. So
I don't want to see that. I've seen it. I know.
I can't wait. I can't wait for Dyer to slide tackle him and put him on the bench for a while. So that's fine. But yeah, I think United have had an unreal window from just a heart perspective. But in terms of sorting out their team, I think they may have missed just that one key signing.
Wahid, what's your number for this window?
8.
What would you give? 8.
8,
Even without. So are you telling us that the goals that Ronaldo is going to generate are more important than the goals that you're going to concede?
Yeah, look, we went into the window, and I think I read on various sources that the targets were a right-sided forward and a centre back, and over and above that they'd wait and see. And I think if we're looking at what the club intended and what the club wanted, they went out and got their business done really early. Yeah, whether we had some issues getting Varane in with visas and stuff, but it was sorted out with minimal fuss. The club knew what they wanted. They went and got it done. And from my understanding, the defensive midfielder was never very high on the agenda this year because Ole's had this idea of not settling for plan B and C and gone with Liverpool's Van Dijk approach, where he said, "This is the player I want, and I'll wait till he's ready and we can do a deal there." And apparently, feelers were put out for Declan Rice, and United just accepted that an England starter with 3 years left on his contract is a non-starter from a negotiation perspective. So they shelved that for next year and focused on what they could get done this year. And I think getting what you can done and quickly is very important. And then they've gone and added icing on the cake in terms of Ronaldo coming in at the last minute. And yeah, I get that there's a glaring hole in the middle of the field where Fred plays, which is a black hole where my hopes and dreams go to die when this man touches the ball. But the thing is that if I take it back, and I'm not saying that the end result will be the same, but once upon a time, United had a glaring hole in midfield where Tom Cleverley and Anderson were our chosen ones, and what we went and did is we signed Van Persie in the same summer as we had already signed Shinji Kagawa, and we added a bit of icing on the cake, and we added some star power at the top of the field, and it fired us to the title, even though there was a glaring hole in midfield. So it's not like it's impossible to go and win things with a bit of star power up front. And I think it's important to remember that, like, above all, football is about romanticism, and it's brought that back. It's a returning hero. It's one of the players I grew up idolizing, and he's returning home. And I mean, what's better than that?
Yeah, it reminds me of when Henry returned home, but he returned a shell of himself compared to what you are getting with Ronaldo. Next team is Liverpool. Jean-Emile, I'm going to throw this to you, but I've got a couple of questions. Obviously,
Center back and inshallah.
Well, yes, is it centre back at inshallah? Obviously, got Konate at 36. He's a 22-year-old centre back. I think that's a bargain because some club paid 50 million for a 23-year-old, but it's fine. But the thing for Liverpool was the guys who left the squad. They made 52 million around that about of guys who left the squad. So it's a net positive from that. And so looking at your window, I kind of felt that, yes, Konate is there, and yes, maybe if you ask if your squad improved, I'd say no. But you managed to lighten the load and prevent a Barcelona-esque situation from occurring, and obviously some good business in getting. Well, you got 10 million for Shaqiri, you got 9 million for a guy I'd never heard of, and yeah, Marco Grujic went for 12, which is nice, or 11, which is pretty nice. But how do you rate your season or your transfer window?
By saying a solid 5 might be more optimistic than people think, but it's even possibly a 6. What's going on behind the scenes in terms of the contract advancements and renewals really can't go unnoticed. It is very important. We've nailed down the spine of the team for at least another 3 years, and we're currently working on the Salah deal, which would make him by far the highest player in Liverpool history. That being said, as you mentioned, the likes of Curtis Jones and Harvey Elliott, they've been brought in to replace. Curtis Jones was Lallana the previous season, and Harvey Elliott this time around is Shaqiri. I have no doubt that they can do the same job as those players were doing. Obviously, what is missing now is that space that has been left by Gini Wijnaldum. And, you know, Jurgen Klopp and the board, Michael Edwards, they've made it absolutely clear in their approach to transfers that, similarly to what you mentioned with Solskjaer, they're only going to go for the players who are going to be there for the long term, who can offer a good deal financially, and who will come into the first team and make a difference straight away. Those players are few and far between for the money that Liverpool can pay. It's quite obvious. Otherwise, they would have gone for Sal, who ended up going to Chelsea. They just can't afford that kind of wage packet. They would have gone for Bissouma, but he would have cost at least about 40 million straight off the bat, and they wouldn't have been able to pay in installments like they managed with the Jota deal. So there are a whole lot of things playing against Liverpool's recruitment at this stage. In saying that, on paper, as a first 11, it matches any team. But we know with this season, the margins are going to be so fine that even missing a centre defensive mid like United, or missing a box-to-box depth player for the squad in Liverpool's midfield, a striker for City, it can be the difference between winning the title or not. So it is a massive worry, especially with the news that Michael Edwards might be leaving at the end of the season now. So a possible 5 there. Konate is a fantastic buy, and also I think you might have seen that Phillips has signed a new agreement. So now we've got 5 fantastic centre backs.
I was hanging around the 5, and I was kind of thinking of going down because January is going to be very important for you guys. But you don't have Salah, you don't have Mane, and I'd be worried as to what, and obviously Naby Keita will be gone as well. Yeah, so I wouldn't know whether Liverpool, because it is about margins, and I thought maybe that's where I'd look for another signing.
Before Jean-Emile starts there, I'd just like to say, don't get too far ahead of yourself here, Paul. This is a club that waited 30 years for their next title. They were really clearly willing to wait another 30. So, you know, perhaps that might be what the plan is to say, let's celebrate the most recent thing rather than trying to, keep on going.
Well, I beg to differ. I beg to differ. We were a Premier League winning team. And 3 of our main centre backs were out for, I'd say, 75% of the season. No team is coming back from that. And in doing so, a lot of other players were overworked. pushed into positions they couldn't play in, and we still managed to clinch third spot. Now we're literally back to the same team, bar Wijnaldum, that won the league. We are really not that far away. When it comes to January, you have to look at the fixtures that the players will be missing. I mean, listen, any game is tough, and we're going to be missing them for 2 games in total, and Brentford will be one of those games. I can't remember off the top of my head the other game, but it's not one of the teams that you expect to do damage in terms of the top 6. But then again, our problem has never been a top 6 team, so I can't really. You can't really tell. But admittedly, yes, when Firmino went off the other day and our only attacking options were Minamino and Origi, it sent a shiver down a lot of the Liverpool fans' spines. Even because when you play a top 3, you have to have that depth, at least 2 very good players who can come off the bench and make a difference.
Okay, moving on to the next team, Chelsea. Wahid, you were tasked with this, or your random generator gave you that. What would you rate Chelsea's window? They brought in, Lukaku and Saul. And they had a lot of exits, which were very impressive, by the way.
9.5.
Wow.
Yeah. I think Chelsea last season were champions of Europe and had one glaring hole in this.
You think? Did you forget?
Yeah. They had one glaring hole in their squad, and they've gone and filled it with pretty much the perfect player for that hole in their squad. I mean, we often talk about horses for courses, and United have often signed players that looked maybe good on paper but weren't necessarily a good fit in reality. And I think Chelsea haven't done that. I think they've gone and found a player that fits their system, fits their ethos, fits their way of playing, and I think that they've done brilliantly to get him in. In our last chat about transfers, I talked about the fact that behind N'Golo Kante, Jorginho, and Mateo Kovacic, there was very little depth in central midfield, and they've gone and addressed that. And I think barring maybe adding a centre back, which I'm not entirely sure that they were desperate for. I don't think they could have. Yeah, I don't think they could have done much more than they did. Adding to that, they are the best sellers of players you've ever seen in your life. They get the money they get for players
They
who
got
I've never
5
heard
million
of
for Victor
from their
Moses.
academy is
That's
just
all
insane.
5 million for Victor Moses. That's enough.
So I think pretty much almost a perfect window from Chelsea. And for me right now, just looking at squad depth, at what they've got on paper, combine that with a manager that they brought in. For me, that's the title favourites. I can't see a glaring deficiency in their squad.
Cyrus, he gave you all the flowers you need.
Yeah.
Anything else to add?
Look, it's an interesting one because as much as I completely agree with Wahid and his assessment, I also feel as if one of the things Chelsea does have here is an issue with if there is a problem with Lukaku. We're back to last season's Chelsea, that Werner's playing down the middle, or Havertz becomes the false 9, and then we're back to those question marks. But I think that nobody ever. Well, let's put it this way: some people don't necessarily save for a rainy day; they spend everything on one night. So that's kind of the plan here. But I do think, though, and this is one of the more interesting things. Chelsea have been beaten with the lone army stick for quite some time, and perhaps it's one of those, much like almost in an NBA sense, you stack up all these draft picks because at some point you're going to cash them in. And in this particular instance, you look at the Lukaku transfer, and they've basically paid that money back in outgoing sales, which it's fantastic business, considering that some of those outgoing sales are from academy players who weren't going to get into the first team. And they're so highly rated that they actually managed to get a fair bit of dosh out of them. I do think, and I'll touch on this when we get to West Ham, but one of the biggest pieces of business is the sale of Kurt Zouma, because I've been a really big fan of his for quite some time, and they managed to get a tidy amount of money for him as well. So I think, by and large, I agree with Wahid. I think Chelsea have done some fantastic business. I do think, though, there are real question marks about N'Golo Kante's long-term fitness, and that's going to be one of the major things.
And at this point, since we've done the top four, I think it's a good point to kind of segment the show. But want to just say thank you to Jean-Emile for joining us on this part of on this podcast. And yeah, we'll call you whenever Liverpool does something amazing or horrifically bad, like my team that's at the bottom of the log. But thanks for joining us, man.
All the
Cheers,
best.
Jonathan.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, bro.
Sure. Thanks. And that is the end of our first show. Do catch the second portion of it, which will be the other 4 teams that matter out of the 8. So we'll do that and we'll air it the following day after airing this one. So thank you very much to everyone. Le sale, cacas.